and thank you for inviting me here to Tallinn. I've been here several times before, and it's always a pleasure to meet my colleague and all the rest of you attending this conference. So today I will talk about what about the boys. I am in Norway. I'm a head of a national forensic psychiatric service. So I every day meet people, mainly boys and men that have committed aggression and killings. And also I have a private practice where I meet a lot of young boys and girls that self-harm. And I have a small company developing digital health solutions. But let's start with, it's a man's world still. So here you see this woman. I wish for no housework, no cooking, no cleaning, less work and more money, and poof, she becomes a man. And that's still how it is in Norway. We shouldn't forget about that women are discriminated every day in all the world. But what we see now is that a lot of the things that women has endured all through history like stereotypes, sexism, is also getting more and more into men. And this is the pictures for you girls, you know, keeping you awake after the lunch. These men, they do not really exist, you know. They are just a fantasy. They exist only in your head and in online and in the media and commercials, right? Of course, the feminists taught us long ago that the thing about stereotypes, like the French feminist and philosopher Simone de Beauvoir, she told us that what happens is that we tend to look upon ourselves through other people's eyes. So the thing is, when also women tend to compare men to ideal man, also the men tend to see and compare themselves and feel that they do not compete very well. And hence you will find that more and more men feel that they are not man enough. So the topics I will specifically talk about today is fear among men to not be man enough, and the shame that also propel aggression towards themselves and to others. So this is a commercial in Norwegian. I do not know if you have this in Estonia, but it's like a pill you can take that will get your testosterone back. And these pills are just bullshit, but they are selling like hell in Norway at least. People are buying them online, and the pills consist either placebo or like really bad stuff. But people are doing it because men fear to be lost men. So they call it, are you dominated by estrogen? Like less of testosterone. And then you can take this pill and your erection comes back, your self-image gets back, and you will be powerful. Of course, men get depressed, as do women. But the thing is, when men get depressed and when men feel shame, they fall harder. So this is the film, The Iron Man, like the number 3. You can follow him like Superman in one of the series. He almost died from the kryptonite. And you can see that when men actually do get problems, they do not get help, and therefore they will fall harder. You will find the same thing like in the old movie of Falling Down with Michael Douglas, about this office, or this person been working in his office for many years and find that the society around him collapse, and then he starts going around shooting people. And that is actually the same topic we see more and more now in the European countries with the school killings. Again, I do not know if you have had any school killings in Estonia, but that is a phenomenon that was really uncommon just 10 years ago. But for instance, in the US, it's getting not common, but not very uncommon, and it is progressively getting more and more common also in Europe. I know in Finland they had a terrible school shooting not many years ago. And back to film again, this is another hero, Brad Pitt, from the movie Fight Club. And what this movie shows us is that boys specifically, and people in general, do not have any purpose with their lives anymore. So you have all this energy, and especially with young boys, have a lot of energy, but they do not know how to place this energy. So they tend into aggression, like in a group setting, where you can find some innocent victim to hit. They can overspeed, like in car, and that of course can lead to car accidents, and they more and more will self-harm. So what you can see here is a spectrum. It's a spectrum from aggression, shame, aggression spectrum, from a more innocent form like graffiti, aggression that if that do not be corrected, it would tend to grow worse. And for instance, could end up in arson, also setting fire in buildings. It could be from risky driving, like when I was in the military, serving as a military psychologist, I met a lot of men, like in the army, well-functioning men, and I asked them, have you ever considered suicide? And they will say, of course, no. But then if I ask them the questions, have it ever happened that you've been angry and shameful and driven a car very speedy and just thought, if I die, that will be okay? Many of them will say yes. So again, it depends how you phrase the question. And again, from rape and partner violence to murder. And what we can see now more and more, at least in Norway, the murder-suicide. So you have gender differences in murder-suicide as well. Because when a mother do murder-suicide, she will kill her children and then kill herself. But when the father do murder-suicide, he will kill both the children, the mother, and himself. So you can see it's the same shame, hopelessness, depression, aggression process spectrum, but there will be gender differences. Again, turning to partner violence, just doing research on partner violence do not get very rich results, because you have to differentiate between types of partner violence. So you have, for instance, the antisocial types, and that is the more serious type, and you have the only partner type, and that is the more common type, like a man hitting his wife once or twice, maybe ever. But then you have the borderline type, and that is something in between. And what is very important with that type is it's very well hidden. They tend not to talk about it. The wife will endure it even though it's very, very harmful and could actually lead to murder. But again, the theme in this particular borderline type is insecurity and problems with attachment. So again, we go back to the spectrum about insecurity, shame, and aggression. So what you can learn about the school shooting is that many of these killers, they have made videos, and they upload the videos to the internet. And of course, that will of course lead to copycats, like getting inspired to do something similar. But we as health professionals or working with these kinds of topics can actually learn a lot of it. Like stalkers, they tend also to upload a lot of videos in the internet. So the thing about I would advise you is actually to go and have a look and see the process of the loss of control from the ideation and when you actually do it. And what we see about the self-harm is when boys self-harm, they do it more dramatically. So I work like in the forensic hospital and in the prison, and there you will see people that self-harm as men, as being part of a gang, will do something we call scarification, and they take like a real big knife and cut themselves through the breast, for instance. And young boys, at least in Norway, that do self-harm, they do it more dramatically, for instance, in their face. Girls do not usually do that. And we see a shift from when self-harm started to appear. I wrote a book about self-harm in 2006. And in 2006, it was seen as a really uncommon phenomenon. But now it's a lot of self-harm in all of Europe. Even sports athletes, they do this. And in Norway, we have a really good study with top athletes. And you can imagine yourself like being in competition all the time, being on the second place, winning the silver medal is not good enough because you're aiming for the gold medal. So we can see in the Norwegian college for top athletes, there's a lot of self-harm, especially among boys. So this is from a newspaper in Norway. One of the skiers in Norway, he's saying, I just translated it, is he's hit himself before every big competition. So self-harm now, especially with boys, is more and more common also about the non-clinical population. I guess it's the same all over the world, like men, when they kill themselves, like double or triple the times, maybe in Estonia, even in a larger scale. But these are the total suicides in Norway. It's like around 600, and the population in Norway is only 5 million. But as you can see, men are in blue, is like double the time for each age. And you can see the age from down below here. Internationally, and at least in Europe, it's the same thing. If you divide in gender, you will see that suicide with men, they will kind of kill themselves with weapons. In Norway, it's really common to go hunting, and many men have a weapon at home. And of course, in the military services, you also will get hand of a gun. So, of course, trying to shoot yourself, it's more difficult to survive by shooting yourself than taking an overdose by drugs. So this can explain some of the things. But I guess you know this is the same thing all over. But going back to self-harm, this is my definition when I wrote the book and some articles I've used. And it's about actually changing something. You're changing your thoughts, your feelings, or your relationship to try to get some kind of change. And most people understand that doing self-harm will not be logically or tend to get any good results in the end. But in the absence of other alternatives, some people will do that. But the thing is, with self-harm, is why isn't hitting the wall? Like, lots of men do that, right? They will go and will be very angry, maybe jealous, having bad thoughts about themselves, and they will hit the wall. I've done it myself when I was young. But we do not consider that to be self-harm. Well, it hurts. It is deliberate. But the thing is, it's socially acceptable. So if we adjust asking questions, phrasing them differently, instead of just asking boys, do you self-harm? And they will say no. If you put into more specific questions, as you should, like, do you sometimes drive as fast as possible when you've been drinking, for instance? Or do you actually hit the wall while jealous? Then you might get more results. And of course, you would like to know this, because if you want to help them, you have to get them to acknowledge that they have a problem. And it's the same thing. Like, this is a big investigation in Norway with 4,000 responders. And as you can see here, in boys, so you have the poor self-esteem. All this poor self-esteem with boys is 52, and that is with girls the highest numbers, and at the same time with suicide attempts is negative body image. And we tend not to think that boys have problems with body image, but they do. And more, as I showed in the first slides, like the sexisms, like now it's more equality between the genders, but it's because also the women discriminate boys and the boys discriminate the girls. So it's kind of getting leveled up, not because of things is getting better, but because things are getting worse. And if you look into like the big case, the self-harm in Europe, it's, you can see the numbers and you will see that there are some common elements in self-harm between boys and girls, but there are also some specifics for self-harm in boys. For example, being bullied and problem at schools will be a risk for self-harm. And as other research shows is that you can actually, if you want to start helping boys, you should find the boys already in primary school that have depression or signs of depression or future or beginning depression and poor self-image. And if you target that population quite early on, then you probably can help a lot of people not developing serious problems. And again, it's also not only the gender, but how we perceive the gender. So you have a term here, and some of you are not familiar with that one, I guess. You call it the positive and negative masculinity or femininity. And the thing is that in the society, we tend to ascribe certain features to man and woman. And positive masculinity will be, for instance, to be independent, to stand up for yourself. But this can kind of flip if it gets too much. So you have egoistic, narcissistic will be a negative masculinity. Versus femininity will be like a positive femininity will be, for instance, to be a kind girl, to do as your father tells you. But a negative femininity will be to be over-dependent. So the research shows that there is a relationship not only with gender, but how we perceive ourselves as gender. So if you perceive yourself as too over-dependent equals negative femininity, that would be important to assess when you try to find out who will self-harm. So, as the last paragraph reads, the findings suggest that it's not the conventional feminine gender role per se that is associated with suicidality, but specific negatively evaluated aspects. And how to find out that? Well, you have to ask. You have to ask the person, the girl, the boys in front of you, how they regard themselves as a boy or a girl. And these matters are probably the reason why people with homosexuality and transsexuality means you are thinking, for instance, me, I would then, if I were a transsexual person, I would think of myself as a woman in a man's body. So people with these kind of problem have like way higher suicide rates and way higher self-harm rates. So, if you go back to the boys, you can see that less than 16%, in other words, most of the boys that will have severe self-harm, they do not get any health services before it happens. And of course, they've been having problems for a long time, but they have not asked for help, and no one has asked them to help them. And again, anxiety and aggression and self-reported symptoms of depression was predictive when you ask boys in the age of 10 years, you can in some degree predict if they will self-harm when they are 16. So what we have to remember, and this is a lesson we know from violence, from killings, from eating disorders like bulimia. When you have the end product is a process, is a loss of control over time. So you can see like on the top is what happened actually like in the outside world, and here below in the yellow and orange and red is the thoughts they have. And what happens when we people lose control is when we get to point 1, we will often not recognize that we are in process of losing control. And in point 2, we will actually notice something is strange, something is wrong, but this kind of insight is so frightening for us that we will avoid thinking about it. So when we have then this boy that is thinking, I'm a loser, that will be a frightening thought for him. So instead of actually doing something with it, he will take like 3 whiskey shots or something. And of course that will actually just accelerate the control process. And when you get the actual insight that this is too bad for me, I need help, then the level of control has already fallen too deep to actually do something about it. So, what can we do? Well, here you can see about sex. I think it's time we had a talk about sex, says the father. What would you like to know, says the son. And these are some concern with the internet and the society we have today, digitalizing everything. Of course, most 12-year-old boys in Norway have seen porn on their cellular phone. And most, like when you are 15 in Norway, every girl and boy has seen porn. And we call this pornification. And pornification, just to keep that straight, porn in itself, results shows that porn in itself for ordinary people do not have any impact. It's like, if not like, if you start seeing porn, then you will going to rape everyone you meet. But it does something with how you perceive the world, like how you perceive women as passive, as subdued, and that man can do whatever they want with them. And also the boys that see all these porn models will compare themselves, and most porn models are better equipped than most ordinary men. And then it goes back to the image thing that I addressed earlier on. So both for girls and boys below the age of 18, they will actually get reduced self-esteem by watching porn. So what should we do? Well, of course, I do not have any more answers than you. What I do have is experiences from Norway, from what we call the youth health station, and that is in every commune in Norway you have such a health station where young boys and girls can come to discuss every kind of sexual issues, medical issues, psychological issues. It's a drop-in clinic, it's for free, and it's very well used in Norway. And what we see is that if we kind of twitch or tweak this service a bit more toward like the needs of the boys, then also more boys will attend these drop-in clinics. And probably this getting help like voluntarily, like with a low threshold in your local area, and you can do this also in school time, will probably prevent both depression and aggression. And what we also see is that boys is more into anonymity than girls, and they are more into digital or online health solutions, and also they prefer a nurse or a doctor, psychologist with the same gender. In the US, they've developed a specific online health services for men, and they call it Man Therapy. And this site is called Man Therapy. You can check it out yourself. It's kind of like they use the stereotype. So this is the psychologist looking very macho with the mustache and everything. But things like the phrasing is shown to have a positive impact of man. For instance, instead of saying like we will have assessment of your mental health, they use the word head inspection, like a car inspection. So it seems trivial, but the use of words are considered to be very important. So the thing about boys, you have to know more specifically about the problems the boys have, and you have to approach them in a different manner. And especially the non-verbal and paraverbal communication is quite important. So, for instance, if I say to you, this is in Norwegian, but you can stakkars, du har ikke det så greit, no, ja, huff. Or you can say, kom igjen, det skal du få til, det går bra. You can understand, it's a different tone, right? This is how you intonate your word, how you use your hands. So when boys tend to come to service, they will show both aggression and shame, the downward looking, a different, more intense, often facial reaction. And again, the combination between shame and anger and depression is what you're looking for. And the way you are balancing this back is with a steady gaze. So again, this child psychologist from The Sixth Sense, a fantastic movie, you can see he's not saying anything, but the strongness of his eyes and the steadiness of his voice is more important than what you actually says. So words, we tend to think too much on what we actually need to say. I will advise you to practice more to how you are saying it. And then, of course, with boys, you have to stress the importance of acknowledging problems, not as a weakness, but as a strength of character. Everyone will meet problems in their life. What separates the weak from the strong is that the strong will acknowledge that they have a problem and do something with it. So if you have some strange sounds from your car, you should go to a garage instead of just pretending your car is okay. So to conclude, as always, more research is needed, specifically in differentiating the symptoms of aggression and depression from boys to girls, and of course the willingness to have an interest in the health and well-being of boys. Because boys, in my private practice, when it's time for Christmas, I do not get any flowers from the boys. I do get flowers from all the mothers, and chocolate as well, but not very often from the boys. They do not cry for help, and they do not always cooperate too well. So here is a typical of my patients. So thank you for the presentation and inviting me.